match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India home. Lords goes wild.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is your host, Siddhartha Vaidyanathan, who is at Sidvi on X. And I'm delighted today to be joined by someone whose writing I've really admired over the years, someone who I've had the good fortune of editing at a few years ago when I used to do a lot of work for the Cricket Monthly, and someone who I'm thrilled to announce has put together a book that is receiving great accolades across the cricket writing world, and was also voted as the Book of the Year by the Wisden Almanac. Scott Oliver, features writer whose work has appeared in a variety of places, including ESPN Cricinfo, Wisden, Night Watchman, and others. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. As I said, it was a great pleasure for me to work with Scott on some of the pieces that he did for the Cricket Monthly. And Scott has made a bit of a sort of a specialization in a very niche form of cricket writing, which is the looking at international players, either when they were superstars or before they made a splash in the international scene, or well after they retired, playing in the leagues in England, playing club cricket in the leagues in England. And Scott has written like a vast volume of pieces about this topic, which has been published in various outlets. And now this book that he has published, which I was talking about, is a fantastic collection of these stories. It's called Sticky Dogs and Stardust. It was published by Fairfield Books last year. And as I said, it has won this award by the Wisden Almanac. It is available to read as print copy. It is also available as an e-copy. I picked up my copy from Amazon, but you can also pick up an e-copy from the Night Watchman website. I'll put the links to all this in the show notes and in the podcast in our website. But yes, I would urge all of you to pick up the book and read it. And it's a fabulous collection of stories that you often don't read about cricket, because it tells you what it's like for people who are doing regular jobs and playing club cricket on the weekends to rub shoulders with giants of the game like Viv Richards, Wasim Akram, Kapil Dev, or Adam Gilchrist, and some really touching anecdotes throughout. Adam Gilchrist is the chapter that starts the book, and it's fascinating how a young 17-year-old Adam Gilchrist goes to this club in England. Nobody has heard of him outside perhaps a small part of Australia, but then he really, the stories that you hear, you can see what made him so good. And it's touching how a player like Adam Gilchrist at 17 actually did some manual labor there when he was playing there in the club. So stories like this that tell you how cricketers and cricket is so much more interwoven with the world that we live in. They're not just like people living in a bubble and playing cricket. They also had lives when no one knew about them. They also went through really tough times to come up. They traveled by themselves. They had to earn money by themselves. And they played cricket, and eventually, of course, they became highly successful. But until then, they were, just like many of us, trying to make a living and play the game. So, yeah, Scott, first of all, congratulations for taking on this niche topic, and talk a bit about your fascination with this, where it began, how you got drawn into this, and how you just went deeper and deeper and deeper.
I mean, I suppose the fascination with the topic came from being a young boy, watching my dad play a reasonable standard. And I think Van Bernholder played in one of the opposition clubs. I didn't know who he was, but I knew he was West Indian. He looked quite quick. And then found out he'd played in the West Indies team in the 70s and there was a Ravi Ratneikar played in the league around that time, and Dilip Doshi. And so, yeah, you kind of think, okay, so why are these international players playing against these guys that my dad knows? And you start to work it out, you know, that then suddenly the position of the club pro becomes this kind of totemic role. It's often the deciding factor between failure and success. There's a lot of pressure on who you get. And then as I started to play cricket, you come across these players that, not all of them are obviously super well known, but yeah, at various times I played against some pretty well known players. Obviously in the book, there's Shahid Afridi would be one. I played with Imran Tahir, which is probably is the longest chapter in the book. I captained him. I captained Rangana Herath. And various West Indians, Pakistanis that got 4 test appearances and 6 test appearances, but they're obviously at my level extremely challenging to play against. So I just thought there's a kind of real magic in this, and I think it's unique to cricket that, yeah, just kind of enthusiastic, half-decent recreational players get the chance to pit their wits against this type of cricketer in a competitive context. And that's the key for me. It's not like a pro-am golf where there's a lot of backslapping and everything's quite light-hearted. Quite often, say, Curtly Ambrose, you know, he's got 10 guys revving him up, and he's got another 100 on the boundary demanding that he run in and win them the game. So if you happen to be the guy scratching out his guard in this scenario, it's a full-on challenge. These are not softballs to drive through the covers. And so the fascination of it comes from those direct experiences, and how I kind of got into the niche. And obviously professionally later on, how I came to write about them as a sort of just the standard story of a freelancer looking around for stories to write about. Cricket Monthly and places like that. I feel like my natural length is about 4,000 words, so to speak. And yeah, the Lancashire League, which happens to be the one with probably the highest concentration of prestigious overseas players, also has the best archive. So you're able to find the stories quite straightforwardly, quite simply. I remember Viv Richards was the first one I did for the Cricket Monthly. And because it was Viv, and because he was about 32 years old at the time, it was just between his Somerset and Glamorgan spells. He wanted something wholesome in the leagues. And so there was a massive press interest in this game. He arrived on a helicopter, landed on the outfield kind of 40 minutes before the start of the game. He had a flunky carrier's kit bag. He had a Slazenger bat under his arm and a Trilby hat on. And it was, you know, proper Clint Eastwood moment, just dropping in. All these wide-eyed kids kind of looking at this absolute superstar, the number one player in world cricket at the time. And yeah, the photographs were therefore fabulous. And that really sort of held that piece together, I think. And yeah, I just knew there were a few others similar level, but the ones that were published, you know, the editors at Cricinfo were kind of quite keen that they had very high profile names. But you scratch away and you just discover more and more and more and more of these stories. And sometimes some of the best stories are actually not the most prestigious names, some of the most legendary club pros. Give you one example, Clayton Lambert, who you'll know who he is, but not that many people potentially will know, but 5 tests for the West Indies, played for the USA after that. But he scored something like 70 league hundreds in the same league, playing there for 10 seasons. So, I mean, that is statue material, really. So, yeah, I think that's English cricket.
That would make an interesting statue with Clayton Lambert's stance. I still remember his stance. That would have been a really good statue to build.
But they tell me that he quite often batted with a Walkman in his back pocket and would sing to him the bowlers running up. So, so that's it. Yeah, just getting into it. And then the names, the bigger names, you know, the first book is pretty big names, all of them, aren't they? Those are the ones which were commissioned, really. And then there's several others that I haven't done, which I aim to tackle in future books, yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic news, which all listeners must know. Scott is currently working on part 2. So once you pick up this book and read it and get through with it, hopefully in a few months' time, you'll have part 2 to read as well. So, yeah, I mean, I must mention here that, the IPL is currently going on, and the IPL also has many of these international stars rubbing shoulders with domestic players. But this is a vastly different universe here that Scott is writing about, because you have a player of the caliber of Viv Richards playing with someone who will perhaps never even get into a selection trial for a county team. Somebody who works at a nearby grocery store in the week, just loves cricket, plays for the club, and then ends up opening the batting with Viv Richards. So the scale of the difference in skills must be emphasized here. Yes, we continue to have franchise cricket and county cricket where players of different skills do meet, but I don't think we'll ever find a situation where this gulf will exist anytime in the future.
No. It's interesting you mentioned people doing, people's jobs. The VVS Laxman story, when at the start in your intro, I kind of thought, oh yeah, VVS, he worked in a petrol station when he was a club pro at Pudsey Kongs in the Bradford League. So yeah, that different. I kind of thought about the IPL actually as the kind of modern, kind of muscle bound version of this. But yes, these players are amateur cricketers. They work 5.5 days a week, but it's an interesting thing, in any given moment, a player who statistically over the course of a career is going to be a stronger player. He's going to play at a higher level of the game. But in any given moment, in an encounter such as in cricket, the way cricket is played, you can have your moment in the sun. And that to me is, those anecdotes are so good when you come across them. And those are some of the best memories of people's lives, these cricketers that say got Viv out. There's a chap in that story who, brilliant guy, his job, possibly the most Lancashire job ever, which was he ran the family's racing pigeon accessory company. So, and he got Viv. He said he got him out 3 times in 2 games because he was caught and stumped off the same ball. So that was Keith's yarn, Yes, so it's just full of little nuggets like that, and very special stories for people.
Yeah, and that one bit about that incident too, where the umpire takes a little bit of extra time before he gives Viv out because, everyone's come to see Viv Richards bat, and here the umpire has to give that out. So there is that hesitation, and then there's that follow-up to that where later in the game, the umpire doesn't call 2 wides. Probably trying to compensate for giving Viv out earlier in the game.
But to be fair, Viv's personality influenced Test match umpires as well on a couple of occasions I can remember. So, yeah, I mean, when Viv, on the first game actually, he was apparently stone dead first ball LBW. And I only learned later on... I can't remember where I learned it, but I interviewed Ed O'Branders. Anyway.
Ed O'Branders, the chicken farmer.
Yeah, who had a good record against England in that period. He bowled us out twice for sure. He said he bumped into Viv at the World Cup a few months after that in India in October that year, and said, "Mate, you were stone dead first ball." He said, "I know, but there was a lot of people there. What can you do?"
Yeah, I actually interviewed an umpire in St. Kitts. And he told me how he gave Viv Richards out once in a game, and there was the crowd just ran in and tried to attack the umpire and said, "How dare you give Viv Richards out?" So yeah, I mean, it's stories of Viv and umpires are legendary, I think, across levels.
So the flip side of that is kudos to the umpires who were brave enough to give Viv out when he was out, and same for all the others, that everyone's come to watch. But there's, in the Lancashire League, there are stories of cars backed up down the road for like a mile and a half, in Everton Week's era. And if he got out early, the instruction to the gatekeeper was, don't let them know. You've got to get them in through the gate first. because they made the mistake once. I think it was with Viv. Viv got out cheaply, and the word got out, and all these cars just started turning around on the road outside outside the ground. That's it. They'd come to see Viv. So, yes, big responsibility on the umpire's shoulders to manage the gate takings there, I think.
Yeah, now that you talk about gate takings, one of the themes of the book, of course, is how many of these clubs got these players. I mean, for the clubs, the players coming in was a great chance to improve their finances and to get more money in and to, get more infrastructure and get, their facilities, enhance their facilities. And there's this really interesting bit when you talk about how when the pros used to bat, there used to be people going around getting a collection from the crowd, and how scoring a 50 was a big deal because that's when you got like the money from the crowd, and scoring 100 again gave you 2 chances. And there's this really interesting bit where Frank Worrell apparently told Garry Sobers that when Frank Worrell was batting, he knew the people who were rich sitting in the crowd, and so he would not get out till the collections reached them, because they would put some good money in. So yeah, it's amazing how now we talk about, money coming into the game. Here you have players having money come into the game at a real-time basis where they're batting and they're seeing the money come in. I mean, that's fascinating.
The other thing with that is if 2 people were approaching a 50 at the same time, one would slow down so that you got 2 collection hats out staggered, by 5 minutes or so. And there's a couple of brilliant photos of Viv going round and doing the collection for his teammates. They're quite grainy. They didn't make the book. They didn't make the web piece, but they're there. And just seeing Viv in this terrace of young faces and old faces, and come on, give us your money, boys, come on. You're not going to say no, are you? So good stuff. He really mucked into the spirit of that club, Viv, and not everyone does it. I think you'll know in a couple of the stories that's not the case. Certain high maintenance Anglo-South African player would be one. Wasim Akram's season, not necessarily his fault, that it was quite fraught, but yeah,
I think even Kapil Dev, there was a bit of that sentiment that he could have done more. Yeah,
he didn't really bust a gut at times. But with Viv, he opted out of the MCC bicentennial match at Lord's, the famous game. The Roger Harper run out, I remember it for mainly. And so that's dedication, isn't it? And really buying into what the club is doing, that kind of humility. Those aspects to the stories are quite nice, those human elements and the friendships that come out of it, and lifelong kind of bond between player and club. Yeah.
Yeah, and it also strikes me how seriously some of the clubs took these things with professional players. I mean, they had rules as to where the player could live. They had rules about, things they could do. They were not just saying you come and you do what you want and you can go away. They had a strict sort of rule book.
I think more for the amateurs. In the Lancashire League was more where the amateurs had to live within, at certain points it was 4 miles of the club, or work within 4 miles of the club. And in certain instances, those rules were stretched a little bit. In the Garry Sobers story, his brother, who is an amateur in theory, was given an address which was actually an office with a couple of miles from the club. It's actually the chairman's office. And I think he went and lived with Garry in Manchester, which is, 30, 40 miles out of the area. So, there were definitely, in the golden age, sort of pre-1960s, that was much more kind of rigorously policed. But the Lancashire League is super, super parochial. They would be upset if pros weren't making themselves available from the first game through to the last game. Even if there were clashes with international cricket, these proud men of Bacup Cricket Club and Rottenstall Cricket Club, they would assume that the player would opt out of an international game to fulfill their contract. And there were fines involved for the clubs. There's a fine for any game you played without a pro, because it was there, from the league's perspective, the administration of the league, it was there to provide entertainment and to draw the crowds in. So So even the cup games, for instance, you could bowl all day at one end. There was no over allocation nonsense. If you've got, Garry Sobers playing, he's going to bowl half the overs and you're going to sit and watch it and enjoy all that. But things have changed over time. But yeah, definitely these are superstars in that context, not just from whatever prestige they have as cricketers. They are there to draw the crowds. And if you think about the 1930s and 50s as the real sort of peak of interest, and there's all kinds of non-cricketing reasons why that ebbed off, obvious reasons, more leisure choices and so forth. Around that time, a 5,000 crowd would be fairly standard in the Lancashire League and the Bradford League, probably. Bigger, probably in the 20s and 30s, the SF Barnes era, Leary Constantine, 10,000 crowds. I know of quite a few games with 10,000 people there, that's about 800% more than most county championship games these days. So,
yeah. And yeah, I mean, talking about, from the Indian point of view, we spoke about VVS Lakshman, and as recent as, the 90s, I remember all these players, VVS Lakshman, Wasim Jafar, Amol Muzumdar, used to regularly go and play club cricket in England. They used to have jobs during the week. And many of them have spoken about how valuable it was for their cricketing education and how living alone, earning money during the week, coaching sometimes, and then playing in the weekend, playing on not so batting friendly wickets often really helped their game and helped them as people, and how they grew largely because of that experience. You don't see that these days. I mean, Indian players have other ways in which they can, I guess, spend their off season, and you probably don't even have much of an off season now with that. But yeah, I think it's important to recognize that generations of Indian cricketers have benefited a lot from going to England in the off-season, not just Indian, but everywhere else. But even cricketers as accomplished as Lakshman and Jafar.
Yeah. Well, I think of the current generation, the only one I know who has been to England and played league cricket is Shreyas Iyer. He had a year in the Nottinghamshire League. I'm not sure whether I'm going to write about that yet. I think it was about 2014, and
before he was a big name. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can see it potentially. He may not have been a perfect fit for the IPL immediately then. So the folklore of those older generations of coaches in India might be, this was good enough. Especially the 50s, 60s, the play, the Mankads and so on of this world. They lit up the Lancashire League in the 50s. Subhash Gupta, incredible record in league cricket. Pankaj Roy, and so on and so forth. And, really, really held their own as pros in club cricket, going toe-to-toe with your Everton Weekses and so on. So, yeah, but let's face it, they don't need the money anymore, do they? So if it's a choice between rest and an education that you could probably hothouse in another way somewhere else, then yeah, I can.
I don't know about that. I think. Well, yes, a certain set of cricketers don't need the money anymore, but there's so many people at the lower rungs, and even people in some domestic teams who can't get an IPL team. I'm sure they would love to, enjoy this experience, but there probably are other ways in which they can play cricket in the off season. So, yeah.
But it's not so easy to come to English League cricket on the pitches and just smash it. That's the thing. If you want to project your potential readiness for T20 cricket, maybe you've got to find a way to get to go up that ladder, if you know what I mean. But you mentioned Wasim Jafar. Actually, he played at my club. I was in my second retirement at the time, but I did speak to him a few times. In fact, I'd just come back. I was the second team captain, and he did quite well. But everywhere else, he just made a load of runs. I've got a sketchy idea of his record, and there are quite a few 100+ average seasons. You know, and he's that mentality of doing the business, doing the job. You see, you know, I think he's the all-time leading run scorer in Indian first-class cricket. Is that right?
Ranji Trophy, yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. He, you know, as a man who's born to occupy the crease.
Yeah, and I remember talking to him about this many years ago, and he said how even years after he had left the clubs, he'd still be in touch with people in that club to find out how they were doing, what they were doing, and if there was any promising youngster that he saw, like 17, 18-year-old youngster in Mumbai, he would recommend them to the club. So he had a long association with English club cricket. I won't be surprised if he's still in touch with many of them and recommending, someone somewhere.
Yeah. Well, he played in the Huddersfield League for quite a long time, but I definitely played in the Liverpool competition, which is a good league, and the Birmingham League, which is a very good league. He played for Wolverhampton, which is Moeen Ali played there for a bit, and Vikram Solanki, if you remember him.
Yes.
Yeah, so, yeah, he was well liked, Wasim Jaffer, yeah.
Yeah, I want to get a bit into the Gilchrist chapter, actually, because there were a few things that came to mind. Number one, in 1989, probably 100 people might have heard of Adam Gilchrist, right? How many people knew Adam Gilchrist? But here you had this 17-year-old go to England by himself, preparing for his final examination, his school finals, but still going there, playing, doing manual work, like clearing ditches there and doing the work. Also, sometimes finding it hard because of the drinking culture that is prevalent in club cricket in England, where you're expected to bond with the team over several pints of beer, but then overcoming those challenges, doing really well, and even setting up a scholarship so that in that club. It's a fascinating story of us, from 17 years old. And then you mentioned how they had a 20-year reunion in 2009, for which he was there well after. This was even after he retired from international cricket. It's such a lovely sort of, a look into a relationship between a star and the club. How fulfilling was it for you to do all the interviews? Did you speak to him? How was that?
I didn't speak to Adam. He read the piece, though, because I think it's on the back of the book, his remarks about he posted something on Twitter at the time. You scrape away at the story. With that particular one, there was a chap called Chris Goldie who provided me with a lot of information. And, you do have to delegate sometimes the research to people within the club, saying, look, I'm going to try and tell as full a story as possible. What can you give me stats-wise and everything? So, but the story, you'll know this well, the story is the story. So whatever comes organically, that's how you have to tell the story. And with Adam, he's a famously chivalric cricketer, if you like. He was a walker, famously did it in a World Cup semi-final, did he? It was definitely a high-profile game.
Semi-final, yeah.
Yeah. So, somebody who kind of was slightly different to that kind of hard-edged Australian winning machine. He was a slightly different personality, and now he's a Christian as well. So there's that kind of humility and ethical outlook, I think, in all facets of his life. Yes, I was expecting to find something like that, but it's always surprising what the details are. And the drinking culture thing, I think that was, don't get me wrong, it is an English staple still to a certain extent, maybe less so now. People drift off after the game a lot more, but I think the biggest problem for him then was Brad McNamara, who was an Australian state player who went on to become head of cricket.
Director of Channel 9, yeah.
That's right, yeah. So I think he was in the same house that Adam was in, but Adam was a 17-year-old, and I guess they thought we'll show. A bit like that episode of The Simpsons where Homer takes Bart hunting into the mountains. It's kind of a bit of a parody of Deer Hunter. I think they think he's gay because he's got a friend somewhere, and so I know we'll get him to kill a deer, and it will make him straight kind of thing. So yeah, I guess it's the old this will put hairs on your chest, lad. Get a pint down you kind of thing. But he managed to cope with it. Obviously, he got his runs. He was strong enough to tip his beer in a plant pot in the backyard of a pub a few times, and yeah, he came out of it. I think the fact of being far away from home on your own and having to sort of survive is a big thing, and how the club then reaches out and supports that young player. I think Richmond did a great job with him, and people, and the AB de Villiers story quite similar, I would say. And they, are very down to earth people who really, really respect how the club's looked after them. Because if that experience goes badly for them, who knows how it affects the next couple of years? Does it toughen them up? Does it make them bitter about certain things? Or, there's lots of potential. These are kind of alternative histories to be imagined. But yeah, I think they're very grateful generally for the husbandry of them as young adults through that season and taking care of things for them. Yeah.
One of the other themes in the book, of course, is the aging fast bowler, and it's Malcolm Marshall, of course, being a prime example that you write about, but there are others too. I mean, Alan Donald is on the cover of the book. I won't call him aging because you write about him in 1996, I think, the season in 1996, where he was pretty much, very much in his prime. But yeah, I mean, talk a bit about the Marshall chapter and, any of the other fast bowler chapter that you want to talk about. It's interesting how cricketers who finish their careers go and play in a club and they're still good enough to terrorize the club pros. So for the club pros, they're like, oh my God, if he's so good now, imagine how good he would have been at his palm.
Yeah, I think I'm remembering probably the anecdote in that chapter that you're referring to is the chap Terry Hunt, who was a Barbados state player. And yeah, he smashed Marshall through the covers for 4 first ball. Oh no, I think he pulled him actually, 4 first ball.
Pulled him, yeah.
And yeah, so Marshall, who would have known most weeks that he was going to bowl half the overs, so very rarely would have bowled flat out. He might have bowled the odd ball, just strategy. Let's just spook the batsman a bit or play with his feet. But that day, apparently, he gave it 3 overs of the real deal Mako, and he was still playing state cricket, in South Africa. He went to South Africa and topped the first class bowling averages there. So he was very close to the end, but he still had a bit of petrol in the tank. And yeah, so, Marshall is probably most people's idea of the best quick bowler of the last 30, 40 years, I would say, certainly in the top 3 of everyone. And to just witness it, I played against some quite decent West Indians, but, this is about 3 levels up from that. And it's this. Everyone knew he had the skill set, the magical wrist, and he performed well in Asia and wherever. But yeah, was he going to really bend his back? And this day it happened. And Terry Hunt, I think he has about 8,000 more runs in that league than the second highest run scorer. He married a girl from Kendal, settled, and is a total legend. There's seasons where he's scoring 700, 800s out of 18 innings and stuff, and he was a proper player. So Marshall wasn't picking on anybody, any weak player. As you say, he singled out the top dog and kind of showed him what was what. And Eldine Baptiste actually was, so Terry Hunt was an amateur notionally, allegedly, and Eldine Baptiste was their club pro, and there was a bit, probably a bit of inter-island spice there. I think they tended to bring the best out of each other when the pros went head to head. I definitely saw that a few times. And yeah, so it must have been phenomenal for a club player to just, even for 3 balls or an over here and over there, to see. There's, I think, a similar story in the Wasim Akram chapter where a chap called Mike Rindell, who I actually played against, played about 20 ODIs for South Africa.
South African, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So he got 100 against Wasim Akram in a dubious final, the Mandela Trophy final, where the result might not have been reached in a natural way. So he whacks Wasim through the covers for 4 in the first over, and Akram then just goes up the gears, like goes to a gear that he probably didn't want to use, but he's going to do it because professional pride kicked in, knocks him over. And then the next 2 players are really decent players. Oh, I think one was Mark Waugh, who got over 10,000 first-class runs. Not the Aussie Mark Waugh, the Mark Waugh from Warwickshire, by the way.
The other Mark Waugh,
Yeah. And another one was a really good minor counties player who'd made runs against counties. And they're all out in like Wasim's first 3 overs. Okay. And yeah, he then hits someone in the mouth. It breaks the toe 2 balls earlier, and then gets one through the grill and knocks a couple of teeth out. So yeah, it's just kind of that little stretching of the feathers, and okay, this is how good I am, kind of thing. If the context sort of dictated it, I suppose, showing that's in reserve. But yeah, I mean, there are a few stories, Sid, where they don't need to be prompted in any way. In the second book, for instance, Sylvester Clarke, he just goes hard at everybody.
I think the legend around Sylvester Clarke is that he just went for the head, not for the bat. So
doesn't matter how far you're backing away either. He's coming after you.
Yeah. I think so, and I like that part about the fast bowler specifically, because there are different spinners who play post their retirement, but a fast bowler doing perhaps one of the hardest jobs in cricket, to be able to then get his body into some kind of shape to go all out. There is something to be said about that, and also something scary to be said for the person at the other end.
I mean, I think the front cover encapsulates pretty well the challenge, doesn't it? It's Alan Donald in mid-delivery stride on a club ground with a school teacher facing him who's picking his bat up about 4 inches to make sure he doesn't get yorked. And, Donald is 29, I think, that year. I think he's 29. So it's 2 years before that very famous spell with that duel with Michael Atherton at Trent Bridge, which was, very, very quick. So, yeah, massive challenge. And he did bowl the odd short ball as well. There was a code of honour amongst some of them. Wes Hall, back in the day, didn't bowl a bouncer all season, apparently.
The reverend for a reason. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And then the great Michael Holding, which is a second book story. Only on one occasion, I believe, did he go hard at the batsman. So I think, and Courtney Walsh was quite similar, rarely bowled short. I think they kind of felt, well, if I have to bounce, a publican or or a park keeper, then I shouldn't really be doing it. So.
I have to add a detail about that cover photo where Donald is mid-stride. He's on his leap, the famous leap. You can see his face and that expression that he would have in international cricket. It's almost like he's sucking in some wind to sort of just let it out there. And the non-striker, you spoke about the batter on strike, but the non-striker is looking down. It's almost like he's praying. He's like, please let this not kill the batter. It's that kind of an image.
How did I end up here? I just wanted to play a game I enjoyed, and now here I am, facing one of the top 3 quick bowlers in the world, who is not holding back. Yeah, that's it. It's flight or fight, basically. And, if you can get that jellified feeling out of your legs, you've got a chance. Don't pick your bat up too far. But the other part of that photo as well is trying to gauge how far back the keeper is as well. He does look quite a long way.
He's almost out of the frame.
Yeah. You're thinking, how close is the boundary behind him? Because it's got to be fairly these are fairly compact grounds, a lot of them. But that ground, that's actually Todmorden Cricket Club, which is Lancashire and Yorkshire use it for second 11 matches, because the old county border used to run right through the ground. So
that's such a fantastic detail.
One of is the War of the Roses. Well, how do you resolve it there? So there's definitely seasons where both Lancashire and Yorkshire played home games against each other, second 11, and they did a bit like AC Milan playing Inter Milan at football. They'd have one game where they were in the home dressing room and vice versa.
And the one away, yeah.
So yeah, but that wicket would have had a lot of carry, and despite the groundsmen probably spending all week raking it and trying to get the pace out of it as much as they could, yeah, it's still quick through the air. And I faced Tino Best, and it was a really slow wicket, but I thought there was a potential beamer coming at some point. So despite how slow the pitch was, that's still in the back of your mind as well. with someone with white line fever as bad white line fever as he has. So yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing about this book I must tell listeners is that it has some wonderful little bit of detail there that suddenly makes you just stop and go, wait, what? And then you sort of go back and then you read again. There was this one bit I read where I think this must have been in the Viv chapter, where you say there was a 5-year-old James Anderson there with his dad to watch, and then it rained that day. And I just read that, and then I went back. I'm like, oh my goodness, 5-year-old James Anderson. How did Scott find that?
Is that right? Is that chapter? I know he appears he's in the Shane Warne chapter scoring. He's doing the plates in the scorebox when Warne plays at Burnley.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, since some of my memory of this book is a little...
No, I think it's a game where Rishton play at Burnley, and then you say 5-year-old James Anderson was there with his dad to watch. Yeah. And that was a really good detail. It sort of, just opens up a little window in your head, and you're thinking of Viv batting and 5-year-old James Anderson in the stands. It's a lovely image. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he played a fair bit for Burnley himself, Jimmy. But being a non-overseas, I'm not going to write about it, but he does crop up in a story in the second book. Chris Cairns plays for Baker in 2006. Ryan Harris is also in the league that year. And Jimmy had a stress fracture of the back and didn't play any cricket that summer, any first-class cricket. And then in sort of August, he comes back to play for Burnley as a batsman at number 5. And I'm thinking, I recently heard Stuart Broad saying how much Anderson hates batting. But there he is at number 5 with Ryan Harris. So, and Chris Cairns wasn't slow, was he? So, yeah, no, interesting. And he, without giving too much away, he maybe influences the outcome of the title that year with the bat.
With the bat. Wow, yeah. That's a delicious story to look forward to in part 2. I'd love it. I mean, James Anderson, in my head, when I think of James Anderson, the batter, I always feel a bit sorry for him, because he's always the man right at the end of almost like at the end of a test match when England are batting. So when they lose a match, he's like shaking hands. He's really disappointed that he's got out. And that famous game where in New Zealand, where Neil Wagner gets him caught down leg, where they lose by like 1 run. And I'm like, James Anderson all the time, poor little chap, has to just be disappointed and shake hands and walk off for no fault of his, because the rest of the team has not done the job.
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't enjoy it. And there's the game against Sri Lanka at Headingley. He's caught a short leg, second last ball of the game as well. He always seems to be trudging off disappointedly, doesn't he? Poor old kid.
Except I think for one test, I remember where he and Monty Panesar, they draw the game against Australia. This might have even been Cardiff, where they draw the test in an Ashes test. And yeah, that was a happy moment for James Anderson to walk off the field.
Yes. That was the Bilal Shafayat glove running game.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, at one stage, didn't Jimmy have the most test innings without having scored a duck?
Yes, probably.
Is that right? I thought he went like 80 innings before he got his first duck. something like that. It's gone fairly downhill since then, but yeah, he got 70 odd, didn't he, at Trent Bridge when Shami also got a score on the
yes,
worst test pitch I've ever seen. One of the slowest in England for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other detail that I really enjoyed is that the bit about, again, we're back to the Viv chapter, but the Viv chapter is so good that it has so much little fantastic detail, is that Fani de Villiers is bowling to Viv Richards, and he has never seen Viv Richards bat. And Fani de Villiers is wondering why everyone's like so hyped up about this guy. Well, the whole world knows about Viv Richards, but Fani from South Africa probably has never seen him on TV because that was a time when they would never have seen cricket from West Indies on TV.
I believe the South African government of the day weren't too fond of showing black men in their best light. I think Fani took umbrage at Viv whacking him through mid-wicket off perfectly respectable full stump deliveries, didn't he? I'm the pro. He should be doing this to the club bowlers, not me. But yeah, I think there was a chap in that season who properly whacked him as a local guy. I think he's an insurance salesman. A teammate of Kapil Dev's at Nelson, a guy called Ian Clarkson, who has quite a portfolio of such innings. And I think he got 40 off 3 overs of Fani de Villiers, and Fani literally held up a white handkerchief and kind of said, I can't bowl to this guy anymore. But interesting character, Fani de Villiers. Great record, actually. I didn't realise, and I reminded myself of it. Very low 20s average, isn't it? Certainly under 25, I think. But yeah, it just, some of these guys, they just walk out there and play the ball, not the name, and if the wicket is quite slow, going upstairs isn't necessarily too good an option for the quick bowler. So yeah, I mean, when we played Tino Best, we had a 45-year-old opening bat that day, Roger Shaw, compulsive hooker, and I said, look, Rog, don't take the first one on, have a look at it. And sure enough, first bouncer, whack, 1 bounce, 4 through square leg. It didn't last very long after that because Tino pitched it up. But yeah, I mean, this is it, the great leveler. I mean, over 15 years, these chaps are going to win, obviously, a lot more. These international stars are going to win a lot more head-to-heads with club cricketers, but there's always that chance for your moment in the sun. Those great lifelong memories when you bested player X, player Y. And certainly in the Lancashire League, there are some of those guys who've got quite a list of people they made 50 against and people they got out for single figures or, under 20. So, yeah, finding a few of those. Keith Roscoe would be one who I mentioned earlier, the left-on spinner who was still playing at 62, was still doing a job left, in the league. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I have to I'll just read out a line here that you have in the Garry Sobers chapter where, the BBC radio presenter, Nigel Johnson, he sums it up by saying, Worrell, Laker, Sobers, all these players were visible, they were approachable, and that was a very important thing. To go home on a Saturday night and say, I saw Garry Sobers, I spoke to Garry Sobers, I had a drink with Garry Sobers, and I shook his hand when he left. What memories, what memories. I mean, that sort of speaks for it, doesn't it? I mean, it's that, how many people can imagine shaking hands with Garry Sobers, but also then playing with him and talking to him and, talking to him at the top of his mark before he bowls or talking to him just before he goes out to bat. I mean, those are like things that the stuff of dreams that many amateur cricketers live for, but they actually can do it week after week through several months and perhaps through quite a few seasons. So that's just a dream right there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the key year there is 1968. So everything before, those players, if they had if they wanted to play cricket in their off seasons, English League cricket was the only option. Then obviously counties then allow overseas players from 1968 onwards. And I guess those experiences then become more special, maybe, in terms of mingling with the stars and fraternizing with them. There's Garry Sobers plays at a club called Littleborough at the end of his career, one season when he's 38. That's 1975. And that's the first World Cup year, right? And it's part of his contract is he gets to go and play in the World Cup. But he pulled a groin the week before the West Indies squad were going to meet up, and so can't participate in the World Cup. And Sobers never played a World Cup, right? And it's because he was doing a job for Littleborough and, tweaked a groin. And people won't probably know that that's the reason why that happened. And there's all these kind of little, deviations in in historical events, small little events that happen in club cricket that then play out or have ramifications for international cricket. But yeah, I mean, that fraternization, I think that's also a magical part of it. It's not only the on-field stuff, and there are lifelong friendships formed. Joel Garner succeeded Sobers at Littleborough, and this is again a second book chapter, and he became very close friends with a chap there called Roger Lord. So Garner's first year, he had played 2 first-class matches. He was 23 years old. I didn't realise how late a developer he was. And then by 77, he's played 7 test matches, and he plays a few games for Somerset that year. 78, Somerset want to sign him full-time, but he says, no, I have a contract at Littleborough. I'm going to see the contract out, so I'll make myself available around their needs. He starts playing televised Gillette Cup games and what have you, and his figures are crazy. Old school 60-over cricket and 55-over cricket, but it's 9 overs, 5 maidens, 1 for 6, stuff like that. And he's winning this is like he's starting to penetrate the English sporting consciousness here, but he's also playing for Littleborough on a Saturday. So there's stories of him phoning Roger Lord, having won man of the match in a televised quarter-final of the Gillette Cup, winning his Jeroboam of champagne, saying, right, Roger, get some fish and chips in. I'll be back at 8:30. And they're sitting there with a plate of fish and chips and a mug of champagne in this flat in Rochdale, wherever. And they're still very good friends. And yeah, the game is a broad church. That your status as a cricketer shouldn't dictate the nature of your friendships. But that is as well that that's specific personalities. You talked about Adam Gilchrist a while ago now, and yeah, humility and seeing the relationship between club pro and club as what can I do for you as well as what can you do for me, putting in and just kind of putting your great talent at the service of the needs of the club. But I think also that relationship should work the other way. The clubs tend to think of the overseas star as someone who's going to help them fulfill their dreams of glory. And yes, okay, maybe coach some kids and so forth. But sometimes those players come into quite difficult circumstances in the club, and maybe the club could do more. I felt that with Rangana Herath when he came the year after the story recounted in the final chapter of the book, the Imran Tahir story. So we had Rangana the following year, and he got called up by Sri Lanka midway through the series, our summer, and that was when his career took off, actually. He was man of the match and took his first 5-foot in the first and second test. I can't remember the order. But then he came back to play county cricket and struggled. I think it was Surrey, or actually called me and asked if I didn't explicitly ask. He intimated he'd like me to go down and spend some time with him. And I brushed him off because I was struggling with my PhD and I was at quite a low ebb and I didn't have any energy to give to him. So I brushed him off, and then I spoke to him a couple of times later in his career. But then in lockdown 3 years ago, I interviewed him for Wisdom Cricket Monthly, and I said, look, Rangan, I've got something I need to get off my chest. I really regret not coming down that time and spending time with you. And he said, look, you've got nothing to apologize for. except for all the catches you dropped off me at slip.
Classic Rangana Herat reply.
but yeah, that was a really difficult season. The team was weak, and that's his only real experience of English club cricket, and it could have been better. So instead of thinking, the pro could have done this, that, and the other, also the clubs need to look at themselves and say how much did they make life easy? And we our intentions were good. It was just the circumstances were difficult. The team was in transition. I didn't have much to give to the dressing room, and yeah, so yeah.
So just, as we wrap up, I want to ask about, there are a few passages and few times in the book where there is a sense of wistfulness of an era that will never come back, simply because of the way the game has moved on, the way the game has moved forward, and how club cricket and county cricket and everything else has changed. Do you think that is for the good? Do you just think that, we should look at it as, we had telegraph machines and things before, and now we have internet and email, and so the world moves on, life moves on, and once that era is over? Or do you look at it more in the sense of people can do something to keep that scene still thriving and vibrant, and there is a bit of neglect on that front? How do you look at it personally?
I don't think there's neglect. It's just historical forces unfolding. The market for overseas pros now is, you are looking elsewhere because you just know in advance you're not going to get an established top-level cricketer. Not just because of the money involved, it's just the incursion into the summer and people going off to join this league and that T20 league and this. And as a club, you want stability and continuity. However, still, you might get a future star when you don't know they're going to be a future star in their late teens, maybe 20, 21. So in casting the net out for stories for the second and third book, for instance, the Kiwi, the Black Caps from the World Cup just gone, the team that played at Dharamshala, the great game against the Australians, I reckon about 6 or 7 of them have a club cricket story. Devon Conway played a lot of league cricket, a lot. Will Young, Matt Henry, and so on and so forth, Jimmy Neesham, they played a lot. Keshav Maharaj, a beautiful bowler, he played Lancashire League. So it depends. I think you're going to struggle to get Indian players of a certain level, especially with the IPL taking place when it does. Even the Pakistani market has shrunk, I would say, and is moved now over to Sri Lanka as the place to get bargains and players who are going to be around all summer. So, yeah, it's just, broader historical forces and people having to make choices within those circumstances. And yeah, I guess there is a kind of wistful element in the book. I'm not really a nostalgic person as such. I just, I don't lament a lost era. It is what it is. I just kind of addicted to the charm of those stories, wherever they take place. I mean, there are a few 21st century stories in the second book. Jesse Ryder's quite a good one. And Morne Morkel and so forth. So yeah, they're still there, little bits and bobs. But I mean, yes, the notion of the top 5-10 players in the world all kind of appearing in the leagues of Lancashire or the north of England is obviously pie in the sky now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Virat Kohli is not going to be batting against tea seller. I think we can be fairly certain of that.
Well, I mean, it depends how good your contacts are, and if you can persuade, then good luck to you, more power to you. And I have to say, Morne Morkel, he played against Mohammed Asif in the same division that year, played 2 games, and there was a third club who signed Mahendra Singh Dhoni for the season, but he didn't come. He didn't come. It's a bat maker I know quite well. Who, yeah, he's still friendly with him, actually. And that would have been a great story. Dhoni, Asif, and Morkel all playing third-tier cricket in North Staffordshire together. But it didn't happen. I reckon he might have done quite well, Dhoni.
Yeah, you never know. Maybe a 50-year-old Dhoni finally makes it up there and plays a couple of games for some club for fun. Yeah.
Underfoot CC. I'd back him to take 60 wickets.
Who, Dhoni? All right. So
the thing with Morkel, just to say this is hilarious, that when he signed, he was 17. So he was the pro, but they had to take him off after 7 overs each spell because those were the ECB fast bowling directives.
Oh.
So come on, bro, come on. Okay, bro, you got to come off now for 7 overs. Just strange one, but yeah, lovely stuff.
Lovely stuff. So yeah, I mean, given that, and given how we're probably past that era of club cricket and sort of such superstars rubbing shoulders with so many superstars rubbing shoulders with amateurs. It's great that Scott is documenting all this he's done it in one book, and now hopefully, he has, I think you said 2 more volumes. I thought it was just part 2, but now it looks like part 2 and 3.
Apparently so. That's what the publisher thinks. So.
Fantastic. So yeah, I mean, it's great that you're documenting this across 3 volumes and so many stories to read. And more than anything, I think it's sort of a capsule in time that you're putting together that's really important and will be of great reading material for whoever goes forward and wants to get an idea of the history of the game, and also about how the game is for all. I mean, there is a democratic sense of many of the games there, where Viv Richards, as you said, goes around and helps to collect money for his teammates, and there are times in which superstars are going out there and helping their injured teammates. So yeah, I mean, it does sort of is a great leveler in so many ways.
It humanizes them, and I think some of these stories have been touched upon lightly in other literature, but I think what I've done is I've really got into the guts of what actually happened in depth. In some of the guys' biographies, there's passages, but some of them barely touch on these experiences. So for me, it's, you say democratizing. I think I want to tell these clubs stories, when this famous player was part of the fabric of their club, and there's lots of people invested in it. I think it's nice to show what it's like for an ordinary club to host a genuine star for a summer, and that 2-way relationship, and how things play out on the field, off the field, and how it what legacy it leaves for the club.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I have thoroughly enjoyed part 1, and I would urge everyone to pick it up and have a read. It's not just the stories; it's also Scott's style of writing, which you will, get accustomed to as you go through the book. There is a lovely sentences in there, lovely bit of detail, and Scott has a way with the way he writes and the turn of phrase and so forth. So I will highly recommend this book, and yes, now excited to have part 2 and 3 at some point. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on all the good work and all the awards that are coming your way and the accolades coming your way. We hope that the same happens with book 2 and 3, but either way, we will read it anyway. And we wish you the best with all your interviews, and looking forward to that James Anderson chapter where he's turning the season with the bat.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing such a good job editing Stokistan back in the day.
Oh yes, I'm talking about Stokistan. I spoke about the piece that Scott wrote for Cricket Monthly. He claims that 4,000 words is generally what he's comfortable with, but I know for a fact that we probably took out 4,000 words from that piece, and those would have probably made an equally good alternative piece had we put it in there. So yeah, I will link that piece. That is fantastic. Had a lot of great stories about the Pakistani experience in that part of England. And also how we went through a whole podcast with Scott Oliver without mentioning the name Adrian Shankar. I don't believe this. But yes, Scott Oliver not only documents real cricketers in clubs, he also did this long series about this fictional cricketer who basically was somebody just made up. And
he was a real cricketer. He was a real cricketer. He just made up his own exploits.
Oh, he made up fictional exploits of a real cricketer. Okay. Yeah.
A real, not particularly good cricketer who parlayed his way into a 2-year contract at Worcestershire on the basis of a T20 tournament in Sri Lanka that never even happened. So not the best due diligence there at Worcestershire. And he almost got into the IPL with the help of Mongoose Cricket, if people will remember them with the long-handled bats.
I think Ricky Ponting used to use the Mongoose, right? Yeah, I remember that.
Matt Hayden.
Oh, Matt Hayden. Okay.
Andrew Simons, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Simons and the Mongoose, correct. So, yeah, I mean, there is a book-length investigation that Scott did with Adrian Shankar, which I can link as well. I hope it's still online, but I will find it and link it if it is. And thank you. Thank you for all this great work. Thank you for looking out for the amateur cricketer, I must say, and speaking to people who otherwise would have perhaps never been interviewed, people, giving the amateur their due. And I think you deserve a lot of credit for that. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.
Cheers. And for the listeners, usual reminder that 81allout.com is our website. At 81allout is our handle on X. And you can subscribe to the podcast on any of the channels, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, and so on. You can also, chip in an amount of your choice. We have people putting in a monthly amount, or we have people just throwing in a one-off amount to help us. This is a crowd-funded platform. And also, usual reminder that we are also in the business of republishing cricket classics. So we have spoken about a wonderful cricket book now, but 81 All Out has also republished 3 cricket books: War Minus the Shooting by Mike Marquisee, Cricket Beyond the Bazaar by Mike Coward, and The Summer Game by Gideon Hay. So I'll put links to all of those books there. These are all really great works of cricket literature that you should read at any time, and you will gain a lot from it. Thank you so much. We'll see you in about 10 days' time. Take care.
India have won the series. They're going to get back for 2. India home. Lords goes wide.